All right, hi everybody. So today we are going to learn how to change decimals to percents and percents to decimals. But before doing so, I just want to make sure everyone should have their notes out at this point. If you don't have your notes out, please pause this and get out your notes. Once everyone has your notes out, you should, and we're just going to look through our notes real quick and do a quick review because what we've learned in the past few days is really useful to what we're going to learn today. So, we learned how to take decimals to fractions. If you remember, taking a decimal to a fraction, all we had to do is we took what was after the decimal, put in the numerator, and we decided the denominator was whatever place value that the last digit was in. So like this 45 hundredths, because the last digit is in the hundredth spot, it would be 45 over 100, and then clearly we would then have to simplify. After that, I want to review, so that was changing a decimal to a fraction. And then yesterday, we learned how to change fractions into percents. So in essence, we learned how to take a decimal and change it into a fraction and a fraction into a percent. So today, instead of doing all of those steps, we're simply going to learn how to change a percent to a decimal and a decimal to a percent. So you should be on this page, which is percents and decimals. And I'm gonna do it not necessarily on the notes section, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it on my notebook right here. So if we look at this, okay, we have percents and decimals. We want to change 56% into a decimal. There are two different ways that we're going to learn today. Method 1, which kind of gives us an idea of what we've done and how it relates to now. And method 2, which is a little bit quicker. And you're going to be able to choose to do it whichever option you prefer. So we're going to start with method 1, 56%. What have we learned already? Well, we've learned that I can take 56, bear with me as I'm drawing on here, 56%, right? And we can change this into a fraction. We know how to do this. We've already been doing this. This is something that's very simple to us at this point, hopefully. And we know that percent is out of 100, so therefore if I want to change it into a fraction, we're going to make it 56, oops, that's a 5, everybody, that's a 5. 56 over, and then 100. And then normally I would actually tell you to go ahead and simplify, but because our end goal isn't to change it into our fraction, our end goal is again to change it into a decimal. Whoa, sorry, my screen jumped on me. That was supposed to be underneath decimals. So our main goal is to change it into a decimal. So because of that, I'm not going to bother simplifying. I'm just going to leave it as 56 over 100. Now this should bring back some memories of how to change a fraction to a decimal. Changing a fraction to a decimal, once we had it over a factor of 10, either 10, 100, 1,000, we were able to change it into a decimal by taking the numerator, 56, and changing it into a decimal by just simply putting the 56 after the decimal. 0.56. And I know this is correct because my 6, which is the last digit that's a non-zero, my 6 is in the hundredth spot. So if this is in the hundredth spot, then that makes sense that it would be over 100. Remember how we also said that since there are 2 digits after the decimal, there are 2 zeros, then it all makes sense. So in essence, 56% is the same thing as 0.56, which is exactly where we want to get to. Notice that my percent sign is no longer there. If something asks me to change it to a decimal, I change it to the decimal version and the percent sign goes away because it's no longer a percent. It's now in the number format. So go ahead, we're going to scoot on over to method 2, which again, like I said, is going to seem maybe a little bit easier. So, but we have to remember some rules. So we had 56% again. So I'm getting a little better at this drawing thing. I have 56%. Do you remember where the decimal would go on a whole number? If I have a decimal, and when there's a whole number and there's no decimals shown, when there's no decimal shown, like right here, I have no decimal. When there's absolutely no decimal, my decimal is actually right here. There actually is a decimal. You just don't necessarily realize it because how rare do we say 56.0? Well, we wouldn't. We would just say 56. So that's why the decimal isn't necessarily shown, but it is there. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because the second method is to understand that we're going to be percent is out of 100. And if it's out of 100, it's like dividing it by 100. And dividing by 100 means that you can just move the decimal spot over 2 spots to the left. Which way's left, everybody? This way's left. Okay, so we're going to move 2 spots to the left. So we ready? So we go 1, 2. Now that that's 2 spots to the left, that's where my decimal is going to be placed and moved to make it 0.56. And that gives us our decimal. So that's the other way of doing it. Yes, changing it to a fraction and then changing it into a decimal is one way. And the other way is remembering that you can just simply move the decimal over 2 spots. The only time that gets tricky is when there's only one digit. We have to remember to move it 2 spots. And you'll see that in the next slide. Here we go. Ready? All right, so now I have 8% and 2%. And this kind of brings up that problem that we talked about before. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to do it method 2-way just because I have a feeling that most of you preferred it. So I have 8%. Whoa, there's my 8. And then my percent. Okay, who remembers? Who can raise their hand and tell me where would the decimal be on a whole number? See, there's no decimal there, so we have to figure out where it belongs. Does it belong over here? Absolutely not. This does not say 0.8. It says 8, which means it's like saying 8.0. Does anyone remember how many spots we have to move it over? Remember, we're dividing by 100 because percent is out of 100, which moves that decimal spot 2 places to the left. Okay? So we have to move it 2 spots to the left. Don't forget, it's not 1 spot, it's 2 spots. So I'm going to move it 1, 2. Uh-oh. There's a problem. There's no number here. Now, when there's no number there, that means I need to use a 0 as a placeholder. So my answer, obviously before the decimal, since there's no number, is 0. But then after the decimal, I have to look. I have to place this blank with something. That blank has to be something. So we're going to can't just be a line. We're going to place a 0. 0, 8. And that's really important that we understand that 8% is 0.08. Why is that super important? Because if it said 0.8, that would be like 80%. You getting an 8% on something is a whole lot different than getting an 80% on something. So we have to keep that in mind. So then we have our 2%. I want to go ahead and say, Mr. Threadgill, if you can go ahead and pause it right now. I want to see if you guys can do the 2%. And then when everyone's done, you can go ahead and hit play. So you should have all done this already. And we should have remembered, where is that decimal? That decimal's right there. And we have to move it 2 spots. 1, 2. Oh, it looks like it's joining that 3. I didn't mean for that to happen. Okay, and there's that empty spot, which means our answer for number 3 should be 0.02. Okay, and that should be our answer. All right, so we're halfway there. Good job, guys. Okay, hopefully we all got it, and we're all right on track. All right, I believe you had to turn the page for this one. And now we're going to take our decimals and we're going to change them to percents. This is just as easy as what you were thinking before. Now, method 1, although you may not want to use it, I still think it's good for you to understand method 1, and that's doing it the way of changing this decimal to a fraction and then changing that fraction to the percent. So we have 0.38, and we're going to change this to a fraction. And one of the main reasons why I like changing it to a fraction is because it gets you to remember what we did in a previous lesson. So I have 0.38. I know that what's after the decimal is all going to go on top. So all of that's going to go on top. So I'm going to make it now 38. And then I also know that this 8 is in the hundredth spot. So therefore I am going to have 100 on the bottom. How else do I know that 100 is on the bottom? Well, the other way of remembering that 100 goes on bottom is knowing that I have how many digits after the decimal? 1, 2. So therefore I have 1, 2 zeros. Now we should remember now, percent is out of 100. So therefore we already realized this is 38 out of 100. So what percent does that equal? Well, that equals, whoops, oh no, cancel. Sorry about that. So that equals 38. And then we have to remember, this is super duper duper super uber important. It needs that percent sign. If you're changing something into the percent, you need to make sure that people know that it's a percent. If people don't know it's a percent, then they think you're saying 0.38 is the same thing as 38. That's not true. But 0.38 is the same thing as 38%. That is true. Okay, so method 2, the one that most of you will probably prefer. You have 0.38, and what we're going to learn is, remember how we move the decimal to the left 2 spots to make our decimal? Well, when we're trying to make a decimal into a fraction, it's like multiplying it by 100, okay? And if we multiply by 100, it's like our decimal moves over 2 spots, but this time to the right 2 spots. Okay, so let's move it 2 spots. This time the decimal is actually there, so we don't have to figure out where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to move it over 1, 2, and that's where my decimal is going to end up going for my percent. So I've got 38 decimal. Do I need to write that decimal? No, but I can. Do I need to write the percent sign? Absolutely yes. You have to write that percent sign. Otherwise, your answer is technically wrong. So let's hope that they're all right and you write that percent sign there. So 0.38, 38%. Either choose method 1 or method 2. To me, it doesn't matter. It's whichever one makes more sense to you. Okay, this one is simply changing it to a fraction because we've already done that, and changing that fraction into the percent, and because we've already done that too, actually. And then this one is simply going straight from the decimal to the percent, with the understanding that we know percent is out of 100. All right, point 2. Any thoughts of what it's going to be? Well, I'm going to go ahead and choose that most of you are probably picking to do it in method 2 way. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move that decimal over 2 spots because it's the same thing as multiplying it by 100. And I know my decimal is going to end up there. Anyone notice anything? There's a big gap here. What do you think we're supposed to do with that gap? If you're thinking, hey, I should put a 0 there, you're right. So let's go ahead and make it 2, 0, decimal point. Hey, 20. What do I need? If I'm making this into a percent, my answer has to have a percent sign. There we go, and our answer is 20%. Notice it doesn't say 2%, which is a big issue. Sometimes we see 0.2 and we're like, oh, 2%. No, you got to make sure it says 20%. And then the last problem is a word problem. In essence, if you read it, it's simply just asking you to change 0.4 into a percent, which again, if you move it, if you move the decimal to the right 2 spots, you will realize that again, ready? 1, 2, I'm running out of room, so actually I'm going to redo it right here, 0.4. And we are going to move it 2 spots to the right, 1, 2. And after I move it 2 spots to the right, I realize that, hey, there's a gap there. So my answer must be 40 decimal point, which I don't need to put, but I keep wanting to put it there because I want you to understand that when you have a whole number, that decimal point is at the end. Okay, it's really important that we understand where the place where the decimal actually is. All right, so we've got 40%. All right, if you have any questions, please just go ahead and raise your hand if you need to go over any. Otherwise, that's about it.